Welcome to EM Pulse, bringing research and expert opinion to the bedside.
We're your hosts, Sarah Medeiros
and Julia Magana. Welcome back to EM Pulse.
Last time, we spoke with Dr. Resa Lewiss, an emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine physician, innovator, TED-Med speaker, and co-author of Microskills, along with Dr. Adaira Landry. She shared so very many microskills that we had to break it up into two conversations.
Remember, micro skills are small tweaks that you can make in your personal and professional life to be the best version of yourself.
So without further ado, let's jump back into that conversation.
I bet I know the answer to this, and it's one that you've already said before, but which micro skill is hardest for emergency medicine physicians to achieve, and why do you think that is, Resa?
So, listeners, again, if they haven't read the book, as you said, both my co-author and I are emergency physicians. So a lot of our stories come from the emergency department. And what I'll say is that we started the book with three truths. The first is that time can only be spent. So we really want people to think of time as a currency. So we want people to be thoughtful about how they spend their time and with whom they spend their time. And that really is an homage to emergency medicine, because everything is, there's a time efficiency and often an urgency or an emergency to what we're doing. Next, the world is not equal. And to that end, we all don't start at the same place, but with these micro skills, we hope to fill in gaps so that the playing field, another sports reference, becomes a little bit more even. And then finally, learning is limitless if only it is accessible. Circling back to like the one that is the most important for emergency medicine, what I like to say is, it changes day by day and sort of what the demands are. But I'm going to really focus on that chapter 1, which is the micro skills for self-care. And I'm going to highlight again this personal board of directors, because literally these are your go-to people. And in emergency medicine, we often have bad outcomes. We have devastating stories. Sometimes we have ridiculously funny, joyful stories. But having someone who is your go-to person that you can call when something goes really well or when something goes really badly. Maybe you're worried you made a mistake. Maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe there's no mistake, but the outcome was really bad. Some people call this, quote, a failure friend, but also it's not always a failure. But just having that person that you can call and no judgment, you can just get it off your chest. You don't need a solution. You just need to be heard, or just to say, have someone listen and either resonate because they've had a similar experience or they just understand your world. But having that person on your personal board, I think, is particularly important, because what we do and what we see is no joke. And it's really hard to describe to people who are not in it.
We are all female emergency medicine physicians here, and Julia and I have podcasted before about some of the challenges that women face. What do you think about these sort of challenges when we look at it from a gender lens, and what are the important micro skills that women need to hear?
I love this question. And there's a whole chapter that I think speaks to everybody and speaks to women, and that is the micro skills for networking. So networking sounds kind of creepy. It sounds like it can be superficial, but it's actually not that. And so rather than networking, I often like to say the word connecting. And in fact, before we pressed record, we were talking about now the three of us are part of each other's network because we're now connected. And I love that. And like true, authentic connection and networking is actually how people can be very, very, very successful at work. It's how you can find out about new opportunities. It's about how you can figure out about what's negotiable, what's not negotiable. It really is a really good way to figure out even like what you're missing out on, like if you didn't get a copy of the workplace playbook. I actually wrote an article, another one of these proof of concept articles that made it into the book. I strongly, strongly, strongly identify as an introvert. And some people are sort of surprised because I'm not shy and I can speak before a room of hundreds of people. However, it's where we recharge. It's where we regroup. And for me, it's solo or one-on-one or in small groups. And so there are even ways that as an introvert, you can network. And what I would say, circling back to women and to introverts, is the last thing we want you to do is to take networking off your plate, because it's really important for doing well, getting promoted. And, not everybody has the same agenda about, promotion and, academics, but even just being healthy and feeling good at work, networking can help. So I'll just give one example for the networking. If you're an introvert, is number one, arrive wherever you're arriving rested. this is going back to sleep. Number one, make sure you try to get regular restful sleep. Number two, there's something called deliberate rest. And deliberate rest is sort of doing things that are not work related that help you recharge. That can be exercising. That can be taking a walk in nature. That can be, going and having dinner and sharing a meal with people that you love, that love you, and you sort of those good feelings. And the whole thought behind deliberate rest is that when you return, you're much more focused on your task. So networking for introverts, one micro skill is arrive rested.
Yeah, and I mean, all of these obviously apply to men too, but do you have any specific micro skill recommendations for men?
Great question. And what I'll say is, this book is for everybody. And so I do think everybody can get something from it. So say you're like, well, I've never experienced workplace bias, or, I was given a copy of the workplace playbook. I had parents that really, got me ready for the workplace, and I've always been on the golf course. I've always gotten, in the locker room, and I've had privilege. I'm good. We actually have a micro skill about recognizing your privilege, and how by recognizing your privilege, you're in a position to help others. Because by helping others and having that sort of creating psychological safety for your team members, being a good team player, everybody wins. And that means you, the person who sort of perhaps hasn't had those experiences, you win too.
Resa, you talk about feedback in the workplace. I feel like in academia, I'm constantly being given feedback and giving feedback, but it's not always meaningful. How can we look for meaningful feedback?
To be clear, we are all works in progress, and I have by no means championed all these things well. And in fact, it's often because of when I didn't do things well that I learned a lot and then wrote about it. So feedback is one of them. And you're right. When I was in training, there wasn't as much of a cultural trend to ask for feedback or to give feedback. And in a good way, I think to elevate and to have growth mindset, it is important to be open to feedback, but also to get good at giving feedback. So I share a story in the book where I actually did not give feedback well. I had briefly been at a faculty meeting. A resident doctor was being discussed, and no one had ever given this resident the feedback that was being discussed that had been certain pattern behavior for months. So it just so happened is I soon thereafter had a shift with this resident. And I started and I said, okay, the word for today is pace. Basically, the person had a habit of picking up lots of patients and never closing any of the loops and not dispositioning. But I made all these errors. Again, these nods of agreement. I made all these errors. I didn't prepare the person. I didn't make sure the environment was right to giving the feedback. The person had no idea this was coming. And I did it right at beginning of shift. And so it affected sort of the interaction. And also the person thought it was sort of coming from me as opposed to realizing that this had been a broader discussion that was coming from a greater number of faculty members. So lots of opportunities for improvement. And so I've thought a lot about how I myself can give feedback better, but also how can I receive it better? And I'll tell you two specific things I do. In terms of receiving feedback, if I give a talk, people will be like, that was a great talk. Now, the Resa part will be like, they're just saying that because they're supposed to say it because I'm speaking at today's event. But a friend of mine coached me, and I say this, when people say that was a really, really good talk, and I'll say, and it's not to put them on the spot, and it's not confrontational, it's really because I want to learn. I'll say, thank you. Is there one thing, like what one thing stood out or one thing that you thought, wow, I should make sure I take to my next talk? So I've really worked on the just one thing because it's really digestible for people. And people generally can give you one thing because something stood out to them if they said that to you. And if they don't have one thing, then that's a hint that maybe they're just saying that to be nice. But similarly, I have been in situations where I wanted feedback from someone that worked with me regularly. And this happened at one of the hospitals where I was the head of the ultrasound section. And one of my colleagues who was not head, but I worked with regularly and I trusted their feedback, I would say, any feedback for me. And I could tell that it was difficult for this person to give me the feedback, I think because it was such an open-ended. And I think also there was a leadership hierarchy, a structure that I don't know that they felt comfortable giving me feedback. So I read about modes of feedback. And one way to do this is called start, stop, continue. And so I'd say to this person, what's one thing you think I should start What's one thing you think I should stop? And what's one thing that you think I should continue? And they seemed very comfortable with this framework, and they always were able to give me something. And, honestly, the things that I should stop was great feedback. And also the things that I should start, it means they saw my potential about what I could bring to the team, to the group. So that, again, very digestible and leveled it a bit that I think the person felt less intimidated to provide me that feedback.
Yeah, I love that. So, okay, jumping out of academia for a moment, do you have any specific advice for our colleagues in the community?
So I would say, the book is made up of 10 chapters, and the micro skills are by no means limited to or, exclusive to academia. Micro skills for self-care, I won't sort of repeat this because we really talked good stuff about this today, but taking care of yourself is good no matter where you work and no matter what your industry. I think the navigating conflict, many workplaces spend an inordinate amount of time on conflict. I think one of the challenges, a lot of leaders don't like dealing with conflict. So I think you're going to navigate conflict no matter where you work, and particularly if the dynamic of your work is a team-based situation, which is certainly true of emergency physicians in the clinical environment. And, it's true in the corporate environment too, in terms of working on teams. The final chapter is about micro skills for finding your next opportunity. And I think almost always people are interviewing for other jobs, seeing if they can pivot their skill set. And I think, again, these skills are pretty universal. And it doesn't matter if your, main site is an academic site or a community site or a freestanding site or a telehealth site. And, I'll stop there.
Okay, Resa, meetings can be calendar lifetime consuming. What's your best micro skill to optimize our time in meetings?
Love this question. Okay. First, does the meeting even need to happen? Ask yourself that question. Do we even need to have a meeting? Next, we all think every single meeting needs to be 1 hour. Most 1-hour meetings can be 30 minutes. Most 30-minute meetings can be 15 minutes. Most 15-minute meetings could be a text or a phone call, or ask them the next time you see them and pass them in the hallway or in the department. So really getting out of the mindset that every meeting needs to be an hour, and that we really should think about this deliberate rest of getting away from a meeting culture, because not everything needs a meeting and there are other mediums with which to communicate.
So, Resa, I think in emergency medicine, a lot of us have FOMO. So I haven't seen a study on this, but just talking to people, we love to be in the thick of it and we hate missing out. But that can also be exhausting. So talk about JOMO, the joy of missing out. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is a favorite sort of acronym phrase. By no means did we come up with it, but we love talking about it. So FOMO, everybody in the audience listening knows, is fear of missing out, FOMO. JOMO might be newer, and that stands for the joy of missing out. And I think it's not just emergency medicine, although now that you brought it up, there is this element of we like being in the thick of things. We run towards the fire rather than away from the fire. But it's exhausting and it's not good for us. And fortunately or unfortunately, we're all taught to say yes. And it turns out this is not just a doctor thing. Every workplace, particularly early career, you're told to say yes, because yes might mean that next opportunity. Yes might mean that big break. Yes might be that invitation to speak, to write the paper, to join the project. You get it. But I think it's really important, and this is part of knowing yourself, part of being rested, and part of being deliberate in your decision making and not having too many meetings on your calendar, is that, before you say yes to an opportunity, pause. Say, can you tell me more? Because almost always an opportunity or something that you think you're missing out on may not be that great, but it's only once you're signed up, only once you've already said yes because of the FOMO, that you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be horrible, or I'm really dreading this project that I thought I was going to look forward to. So I think the power of the pause can never be underestimated, and sort of asking questions, saying, can you tell me more? Saying, what is the timeline? Say, we'll talk about, say there's a project that you've been asked to join a committee in the emergency department. Before you join, Who else is on the committee? What is the timeline? What are the goals of the committee? Is there any time that'll get protected from my clinical shifts? Is there any administrative support? Are there deliverables? And so I just came up with a bunch of questions that you can ask when an opportunity is being offered. So I think, rarely do you have to say yes or no right away. People may think, kind of express this urgency, and it's very easy to get caught up in the urgency. But pausing, it never is a bad idea to take deep breaths, pause, and say, can you tell me more?
Resa, other than reading your book, any other resources that you think we should look into?
If you're a reader, keep reading. If you're a podcaster, then keep making podcast episodes, inviting guests on to talk about the topics you want to cover, or listen to those types of episodes. And what I'll share, and listeners won't be surprised, is I've always had it in me to try to be sort of efficient and productive. And it doesn't mean exhausting myself. It doesn't mean moving fast. And it's not necessarily like to get to a certain goal always, but it's about, there must be a better way to do this. And so a book like Microskills kind of helps people along to sort of more easily be better and get these tips and tricks without trying to or having to learn them the hard way. You're generous in inviting me to your podcast. I'll share that I have a podcast which is called The Visible Voices. And on that, I cover topics of healthcare and equity and current trends. And these days, these current trends, a lot is regarding AI in healthcare, and a lot is about lifestyle medicine. And, I dropped an article recently in Helio. I have a column called Lewis on Lifestyle Medicine. And I wrote, after surveying colleagues in emergency medicine that have now pivoted to lifestyle medicine, why are so many emergency physicians getting further training in lifestyle medicine? And I really think it's because we spend so much time caring for patients with all the non-communicable diseases, the chronic diseases like diabetes, blood pressure, cancer, that many of us are hoping to make a difference by being more on the prevention end and more of the lifestyle and behavioral change end, such as movement, such as sleep, such as being in community, and such as food as medicine. And there are more things to it. It sort of makes a lot of sense to want to be able to make a difference from a different vantage point.
Well, that was a super helpful session for me anyway. And my favorite skill is probably being an award-winning sleeper, but really just the importance of self-care.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. It's a simple micro skill, but it is an easy one to walk past. I really appreciated the power of the pause. I've already been saying a lot of times, tell me more, but I love the idea of integrating that pause in before saying yes or no to anything. Rarely these things are an emergency need to answer right away.
So true. So thank you to Dr. Bryn Muma in our department for pointing us toward this topic and toward Dr. Lewiss. I love that we are always looking to be better versions of ourselves.
And thank you to OM Productions for having so many of these micro skills.
So until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and stay tuned.
The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of UC Davis Department of Emergency Medicine, UC Davis Health, or their parent organizations.